Needs are goods or services tied to basic survival and stability. A familiar needs versus wants in economics example is when a household pays rent before buying a new game console. Shelter, food, medicine, and essential transport protect daily functioning. Confusing wants with needs can make a budget collapse. People often feel pressure around needs versus wants in economics before they can explain where it came from. The situation is easier to judge when confusing wants with needs can make a budget collapse is treated as a likely effect, not a mystery. Wants are not useless just because they are optional. In needs versus wants in economics, the real-world version may be that a family meal at a restaurant can create comfort and connection. People value pleasure, identity, and social life as well as survival. The economic question is priority, not shame. This is the detail that changes what to check next in needs versus wants in economics. A person who catches this early can respond before the economic question is priority, not shame becomes harder to reverse. Income changes the line between need and want. It shows up in small moments, such as when a reliable car may be essential in a rural area but optional in a city with strong transit. Context decides how necessary something becomes. The same item can belong in different categories for different people. Noticing that driver early can keep needs versus wants in economics from becoming harder to manage. For needs versus wants in economics, the real sequence matters more than the most dramatic detail. Businesses study needs and wants differently. Look at a case where a pharmacy expects steady demand for medicine while a fashion store depends on taste. Necessity demand behaves differently from discretionary demand. Pricing and inventory decisions follow that difference. The headline alone does not show the whole chain behind needs versus wants in economics. That difference matters because pricing and inventory decisions follow that difference is often where the pain or cost is felt. Advertising often turns wants into felt needs. A concrete version is when a phone upgrade can be presented as necessary for belonging or success. Marketing attaches identity and anxiety to products. Buyers may feel pressure before the old product has actually failed. The background force should guide the next decision in needs versus wants in economics more than the first reaction. The situation is easier to judge when buyers may feel pressure before the old product has actually failed is treated as a likely effect, not a mystery. Scarcity forces ranking. In a normal day, a student with limited money chooses textbooks over entertainment. Resources do not cover every desire at once. Priorities become visible when money runs short. In needs versus wants in economics, the clearer reading follows the cause instead of stopping at the visible result. A person who catches this early can respond before priorities become visible when money runs short becomes harder to reverse. Needs can be delayed only for so long. Picture the situation where skipping dental care to save money may create a bigger bill later. Basic needs often return with higher cost when ignored. Postponement is not always savings. The moment becomes easier to handle when the moving part is named clearly in needs versus wants in economics. For needs versus wants in economics, the real sequence matters more than the most dramatic detail. Wants can still be planned responsibly. The clearest version is when saving for a holiday after bills and emergency funds are covered protects enjoyment. Optional spending works better when it has a place. Guilt falls when the choice is deliberate. That mechanism explains why the topic affects real choices in needs versus wants in economics. That difference matters because guilt falls when the choice is deliberate is often where the pain or cost is felt. Children learn the distinction through small choices. In needs versus wants in economics, someone may notice that allowance spent on candy cannot also buy school supplies. Limited money makes categories concrete. Early habits shape adult spending decisions. Seeing the cause early gives people more room to respond well in needs versus wants in economics. The situation is easier to judge when early habits shape adult spending decisions is treated as a likely effect, not a mystery. Public policy often separates needs and wants. Watch what happens when subsidies may support food, housing, or healthcare more than luxury goods. Governments usually focus on essentials first. The definition affects who receives help. In needs versus wants in economics, the visible event can distract from the driver that needs attention. A person who catches this early can respond before the definition affects who receives help becomes harder to reverse. Business cycles change wants first. Needs versus wants in economics becomes concrete when during a downturn, families may cut vacations before rent. Optional spending responds faster to fear and income loss. Companies selling wants can feel recessions quickly. When needs versus wants in economics appears in real life, this is the detail to check first. For needs versus wants in economics, the real sequence matters more than the most dramatic detail. Social pressure blurs the boundary. For example, a teenager may feel branded shoes are necessary to avoid exclusion. Belonging can turn a want into an emotional need. Budgets are affected by social life as well as biology. In needs versus wants in economics, this is the point where the visible choice and the real pressure start to meet. That difference matters because budgets are affected by social life as well as biology is often where the pain or cost is felt. Credit makes wants look affordable. In real life, monthly payments can hide the full price of optional purchases. Borrowing separates desire from immediate cost. A want can become a long-term obligation. That is why needs versus wants in economics should be read through facts rather than a quick assumption. The situation is easier to judge when a want can become a long-term obligation is treated as a likely effect, not a mystery. Needs have quality levels too. Think about how food is a need, but expensive delivery every night is not the only way to meet it. The category and the version are different decisions. Smart budgeting separates the need from the premium form. For needs versus wants in economics, the important move is to notice the chain from first signal to final effect. A person who catches this early can respond before smart budgeting separates the need from the premium form becomes harder to reverse. Wants reveal preferences. A simple needs versus wants in economics case is this. Someone spending on music lessons shows that creativity matters to them. Optional purchases can express values. Economics studies those choices without assuming every want is foolish. That sequence explains why needs versus wants in economics can grow even when the first moment looks small. For needs versus wants in economics, the real sequence matters more than the most dramatic detail. Emergencies reorder categories. Needs versus wants in economics appears when a backup generator may be a want in normal times and a need during frequent outages. Risk changes what is essential. Preparedness depends on local conditions. The early sign matters in needs versus wants in economics because it can change cost, trust, timing, or emotional meaning. That difference matters because preparedness depends on local conditions is often where the pain or cost is felt. Needs compete with each other. One ordinary needs versus wants in economics version is that healthcare, rent, transport, and childcare can all be necessary at once. A need does not become cheap because it is essential. Households may still face painful choices. The pattern in needs versus wants in economics is easier to handle when the first signal is noticed instead of dismissed. The situation is easier to judge when households may still face painful choices is treated as a likely effect, not a mystery. The distinction helps but does not solve everything. Consider the moment when labeling an item as a want does not automatically make desire disappear. Emotion and identity remain part of the decision. Awareness gives people more room to choose. The answer in needs versus wants in economics is usually found in the cause, not in the label people attach afterward. A person who catches this early can respond before awareness gives people more room to choose becomes harder to reverse. Good budgets make room for both. Needs versus wants in economics becomes clearer when covering needs while allowing modest wants can be more sustainable than extreme denial. People are more likely to follow plans that respect real life. Balance protects both survival and morale. Once the cause is named in needs versus wants in economics, the response can fit the situation more closely. For needs versus wants in economics, the real sequence matters more than the most dramatic detail. Needs versus wants in economics needs to be understood through a specific real-life case. In needs versus wants in economics, notice when needs and wants matter because economics begins with limited resources. People must decide what protects life, what improves life, and what can wait. The clearer the distinction, the easier it becomes to spend with intention instead of pressure. The link between those pieces is what makes needs versus wants in economics useful in real life. That difference matters because the clearer the distinction, the easier it becomes to spend with intention instead of pressure is often where the pain or cost is felt.